Everyone, welcome to this briefing on Pāneke Pōneke, our bike network plan. This is being live streamed and I'm going to pass it over to Vida, but I will say that we've got 2 hours on this briefing and there are 5 different parts to this briefing, so we're going to be really strict with timekeeping and questions. So yeah, pass it over to you, Vida.
Kia ora, Tam. Kia ora koutou. So the majority of today's briefing is going to be around the 3 projects which will be going up for consultation on the 12th of September. But we've also taken the opportunity to update you on the BC grant, which we received, Bloomberg Initiative for Cycling Infrastructure. And we have Skye Duncan here today, who is Executive Director from the Global Designing Cities Initiative. So she's also going to speak to you at the end, but Claire will introduce her later, just before she speaks. First, where am I? I need to be able to move slides. Yeah. So here's a quick overview of the program, but first I wanted to really recap again this slide and talk about where we've come from and where we're going. Our why has been very clearly established through multiple engagements, consultations and decisions which have been made by this council and the previous council. Amongst them, the regional and city growth has had decisions through Te Atakura, planning for growth and Let's Get Wellington Moving, and then of course the long-term plan in 2021. The what, a bike network and the acceleration was also decided through that LTP process, and we've only got 10 months left of the first 3 years of that. The where was locked in the bike network plan, Pāneke Pōneke, in 2022. And the parking policy from 2020 as well, which has been an important part of, and will be an important part of today's briefing. So now we're getting on with the how we implement both the bike network plan and our parking policy. When we begin to look at the projects that are in train or underway, we have 10 transitional projects which are currently at different stages in the process. We could only fit 9 on there. We've got so many. There's also Tumut-Kairangi connections, which is in the discovery phase and the survey's out at the moment. In the transformational space, we're also really gearing up now, and the latest project which we've just kicked off is the Northern Connections, looking at the connection between Tawa and Johnsonville and some of the local connections in Tawa. And finally, before I hand over to Claire, who will speak about the BC and then we'll go into the projects, I just wanted to give you an update on BAS's behalf, that this Changing Lanes report, which we were briefed on a couple of months ago, it's going to be sent out to you in the next week or so, and we'll also go onto our website, just so giving you a heads up while we have you in the room. So now I'm going to hand over to Claire. You're going to sit here.
Kia ora koutou. So yeah, as Vida said today, primarily we'll be talking about the 3 upcoming projects that go up for consultation next week, but we wanted to take this opportunity to debrief on a trip to London that recently 5 of us went to as part of the Bloomberg Initiative for Cycling Infrastructure, which we were awarded back in June. Very sort of surprisingly, there were about 276 cities who applied for this grant, and we were one of 10 selected. I think we had about 3 weeks' notice to get our London trip organised, and I think it was a really amazing opportunity for those of us who got to go, that we wanted to kind of share some of those reflections back here with you all. So I'll just flick through to start with a little bit about what BC is. And Skye, we're really lucky to have Skye here today. He's trapped in the New Zealand, came here for COVID and hasn't made it back to New York, which is very lucky for us. But BC is the brainchild of the Global Designing Cities Initiative, which is a global urban design organisation that's been around for a long time. And if you've heard of the Global Street Design Guide, that's the organisation that really brought that into fruition. They've partnered with Bloomberg Philanthropies to launch this program, which is really focused on supporting cities around the world to dramatically reimagine their transport systems with a focus on cycling. So that in the past, GDCI have worked on big road safety programs, and Sky can talk a bit more about other work that they do. But this program was really about rapid rollouts of bike networks, connected rapid rollouts. So it was about real focus on connected networks rather than just sections, and they are looking to find some kind of demonstration cities, and particularly in areas where there is a lack of kind of world-class infrastructure. So these are the 10 cities that were selected. And what being part of the program means, it's a 3-year program. It did come with some funding, so there was $400,000 US, which changes every day how many New Zealand dollars that turns into. But the key attraction from us really was more in the capability building and the technical assistance that we get from being part of this program. And the Global Hui was the first kind of kickoff of that. So this is just a picture of us all gathered. I think Mombasa, I can't remember if they'd made it for this photo, they had in time. And you can see Michael Bloomberg made it for a little photo shoot visit, which was exciting. And for us, for me anyway, to spend a weekend with Jeanette Sadiq Khan, who is the woman just to the right of Michael Bloomberg, who is a bit of a hero of all of those of us working in street design, was really, really special. And so that was the 10 cities. We had Will Norman, who is the Walking and Cycling Commissioner for London, who's been really involved change in London, and we had 3 kind of best practice cities that came and spoke to us as well. So the themes of the gathering were commitment and connectivity. It was really about, now that we've been selected, building up a real strong commitment to following through on things that we put in that grant application, and to connect with each other so that we've got this peer support network. And it was pretty cool. Straight away after leaving, we had Latifa in our team who came, head straight off to Milan to see some of the work in Milan, and I went straight off to Mexico City and got to see some of the bike networks there. So you could see the network kind of at play immediately. The reason that I think Wellington was of interest to BC, and Sky can talk to this more, was really about that level of ambition and political commitment, which was a really important criteria for the grant. The extent of the network and the pace at which we're trying to roll it out, so that we're not spending decades and decades trying to get it perfect, but we're actually trying to condense the delivery timeframe to have a focus on connectivity. We also put into our grant application that we would like to use the additional money to look at potential off-road commuter networks, so that we can kind of build a more comprehensive network that also offers people a little bit of green space as a bit of time out from all the busy traffic streets. I think also they were interested in our focus on community engagement, and particularly that partnership with Mana Whenua, and I think that was maybe one of the really unique things that stood out with the application that I hope is part of what will get shared around the world in terms of working alongside Indigenous communities. So these are just a few reflections that we took away for me on the way home on the plane. I think the key thing was really realising that time for incremental change is over, and seeing how many cities are doing the scale and pace. It felt really to us like we were doing this really unique thing, but we're really just at the beginning of a journey that so many cities have gone through, which is great for us because we've got lots to learn from, people to learn from. It did also make me think about our approach and our ambition. the scale and pace, I think, does require us to keep innovating the way we're doing things, because it is hard to deliver quickly just in business as usual ways. I think also we reflected on transformation, which for me is often a word we tie with huge amounts of investment in massive civil infrastructure type projects, but we heard of many examples of cities transforming through actually quite light and cheap things like rule changes where bikes can go contraflow on every street and they change that rule kind of overnight, or piazzas, street kind of redesign spaces that can be using cheaper material. So just that it doesn't have to cost billions of dollars for this transformational work. As I mentioned, I think that connectivity and pace was really the key standout, and Seville was one of the 3 cities that presented to us. They're very impressive. So if you hear, Wellington's not a cycling city, is a sentence that every city around the world has their own version of. And Seville kind of highlighted that they were the least cycling friendly city you could think of, with 0.3% of people cycling there. But within 2 years, they'd built 80 kilometres of their network, and they got that mode share up to 7%, which is really quite mind-blowing in terms of that growth. So I think thinking about how we track with our count data can really make quite a difference when you get connections happening, and that's what we're waiting for here in Wellington. The other thing they highlighted in Seville is that they didn't go for perfect, but they went for connected. So, not everything they've done is amazing, but it was the connectivity that really drove the uptake. Mexico City, really different environment. They already have 70% of their trips were walking and cycling and public transport. They delivered a massive network again within a pretty short time frame. They were also an example of a city who removed helmet laws, which I thought was interesting. They referenced that a couple of times. And for them, that bike share scheme, they were one of the earliest, I think, most successful bike share schemes around, and it's really integrated into their public transport system. And when you ride in Mexico, there are just loads of people. It's a more relaxed environment in the street. People give way to each other. Everybody is a lot more chill, it feels like. To me, it felt even reflected in the way you're sitting on one of those bikes. You don't have all the kind of safety gear that we have here. They also have the culture of the ciclovia, which is a weekly thing on a Sunday where they close about 60 kilometres of their major roads, and 100,000 people turn up to just walk and cycle, which is something that happens in a few cities in South America, actually a lot of cities around the world. So that was neat to hear about. And then the final one that presented, and probably was the most impressive, was Paris in terms of the scale of change. They talked about how that city is planning for 50-degree days and how important thinking about things like shade is at the moment. That really struck me because we often hear, oh, Wellington's terrible weather for cycling, and it made me think we have a perfect climate. We're a temperate city. We have really mild temperatures at both ends, and here we have cities with temperatures, planning for that kind of heat is a completely different kettle of fish. They looked at some of the rules. I mentioned that contraflow thing where they actually said, well, we want to make the city as easy to get around by bike as possible, so let's make it possible for bikes to go both ways on every single street. They also have a real focus on young people and children, so they have bike training in their schools, and they have a thing called school streets where they close the streets around schools to cars, and they did that again at scale with 180 of them. So they're starting to reap the rewards of all of that investment. They've had a 90% increase in a couple of years, and they're expecting by next year they've got more trips by bike than by car. It's also been a massive part of preparing for the Olympics for them, that bike network, to manage the kind of transport impacts of the Olympics event. So they were really clear to make sure we knew that wasn't easy, everything that they did, but they had a very committed leadership. Again, Sky can probably touch on this more, that were really making evidence-based decisions and with a pretty crystal clear future focus that got them through those really challenging years of delivering it. So a couple of last things. Something that struck me is around this idea of designing our future for our future and not for our past. And I think the more we think about these new modes that we're bringing in, these new modes, whether it's public transport, cycling, walking, they have far more capacity for moving people than cars do. And I think we forget how inefficient cars are in terms of the space they take up. So when we're planning for those streets in the future, we can plan for the fact that we will have people moving in these more efficient modes, which means we don't need as much space for cars. But if we kind of get bound by thinking about tweaking the situation of today, we won't be able to get to that really different future state. The guy from Seville pointed out that there are kids now in Seville who don't remember a time bike lanes, and it was a good reminder that generations change and we do actually have the ability to adapt pretty quickly to new layouts. And then the last one, I guess this is targeted for all of you, is just really that was the backbone of all of the success of all of the cities was that leadership, but from top down, but also we saw how that top down did lead to bottom up leadership as well. So in Milan, they did a few demonstration piazzas led by the city, but then before they knew it, they had the community wanting to run those and were kind of requesting them from the kind of grassroots level. So we're really excited about with Bloomberg is providing you all opportunities to meet peers around the world that have done this. Part of what we put in for our funding grant is a study tour for councillors to some of these cities. So we're going to work through over the next little while how on earth we're going to do that. Yeah. But even though it sounds like a great junket, it's actually really quite a powerful way to kind of see and learn and see past what we're in right now into what we get at the end of this big long journey. So that's it from me, and we've got some time for questions, but I think maybe we'll keep going. Yeah, we'll keep going because guys can take lots of questions later on. Cool. I'll hand back to you, Vida.
So now we get into the more nitty-gritty part of it, and I'll hand back to Claire in a bit to talk about the bike projects, but I get the pleasure of being able to talk about the new parking scheme, which we will also be consulting on for Berhampore and Newtown. And I always tell people I actually really love parking, because if we don't get parking right and we don't make it work for people that are living in the city, but at the same time also right for our movement and making sure that our city can develop and we can build more densely, then we're not going to have a city that's working. So managing our parking is key for, strategically key to enable the vision that you have for the city and to enable people to live in and move around our city as our population grows. We know that there is a problem with parking in Newtown, and there's wide acknowledgement of that, and we've heard that from the community now for quite a few years. This going out and consulting on this parking scheme gives us a chance to really hear what the community wants in more detail and understand how the space which is available, how we can prioritise parking in those spaces. The scheme is really a step change as well in how we do on-street parking in the city, and is quite different to the schemes which are currently in place. It takes the 2020 parking policy and puts that into practice. The parking policy sets out in the scheme and how we should be doing it, but it also sets out how we should design with the community in these area-based parking management plans. So for Newtown and Berhampore, what we are proposing and are going to be talking to the community about is these three zones. We have consciously left out the centres, so around Ridderford Street and the Berhampore Town Centre, and some of the business areas in the district plan. These already have short stay parking in them, and what we're really looking to address is the issues that residents have raised with us, and also some of the parking around the hospital. When we look at these three areas today, there is expected over the next 30 years that we will have about 1,500 new households in this area with the introduction of MRT and the increased densification that is enabled through the district plan. So it's really important that we get the balance right now, understand how it's used, and then we can make sure that it's fit for the future as well. And here is just a quick overview to see how the bike project also fits into that. So it's really important to note here that even though everyone will not be affected by both projects, we're going to be going out together for this consultation because there are a number of people that are affected by both, and we want to make sure that we have that full conversation where we can. It's also really important to note here that as I was speaking about, we know that there is some areas where there is constrained capacity already in Newtown, and so to be able to really make this bike project a success, we need to also think about how we, with the parking removal on Rental Street, how we then make sure that the bellies and the side streets are well managed so that residents who don't have on-street parking or do have a car can park and have visitors. So that's what's happening. So here's a bit of an overview. We started with a baseline survey in 2022, earlier this year, but we also did a parking survey back in 2019, which we got reconfirmed in 2022 post-COVID. So there's a couple of things that are really important to note here. As we're going through these zones at the moment, we're looking, there's about just under 200 marked residence park in this whole area. What we're looking at doing is marking over 2,000 areas as P120 resident exempt parking spaces that enables residents to park as they will, but also to enable those short stay parking. The people that probably will be the most affected are some of the hospital staff. We currently have 800 to 1,200 hospital staff that park on the streets every day. But when we're looking at the distribution of those spaces, we will still have enough space within a 10-minute walking distance from the hospital for those staff to continue to park. They'll just have to walk a bit further. But on the flip side, it enables residents to be able to park on their streets close to the hospital, and also people visiting the hospital for less than 2 hours, so visitors and people going for appointments, that they'll have a better chance of being able to find a park. There are hotspots, so the hospital is one hotspot. So when we're looking at the distribution of these residence parks, what we're proposing through this is an average of around 50% of the current spaces will be marked up as these P120 residents exempt. But in the Newtown West zone, it's about 70% of the side streets will have these markings. In the Newtown East zone, it's around 60%, and in Berhampore will be only 30% of the spaces. So the rest of the space that's left over, will still be unrestricted parking, which will enable people to use it when they need to stay longer and are not a resident, or for other means such as recreation means and other things they need to do. So we see this as trying to balance out what we've heard from the community, which is mostly around these residents, the need for better residence parking allowances and short stay, with also ensuring that there's still space for people to enjoy the town belt and the zoo and some of the other attractions that are in this area and need a little bit longer. We have taken the schemes that are in the parking policy and we're implementing them, so that's what we're proposing through the consultation. But there may be local tweaks that we may need to make as we get the feedback back, and we'll come back to you with a traffic resolution in December, which has taken on board some of those tweaks. that may arise. Some of the things that we've been talking about is there may be areas that we might want to see longer time restrictions, P180, P240, for example, or there may be places where it's not relevant to have it in the weekends. But that's what we want to hear from the community. We want to go out and have that discussion and then be able to come back and talk to you about it. So here's an example of what it may look like in the future in terms of how we then begin to put some of these restrictions in place. This is the Newtown East, and you can see this is some examples of how we might place the P120s residents as exempt. So in terms of the residence permits, these are also, so the scheme is there's two parts to it. One is the physical markings, which I just showed on that map, and will be where the paint goes and the signs that need to get put in. The other part of the TR is the permit and how they work. And this is prescribed through the parking policy, and this is what we're going out and proposing. But there are a number of things in that that are worth noting, I think, just quickly, and then we can move into questions. And I've also got the parking team here to help with additional questions. So there was, in the parking policy, there's a sort of a tiered scheme about eligibility and the criteria. And those are what people will apply, and they will be assessed after that criteria and eligibility. But on top of that, you can see that households will also be given some free visitor passes. So that's, for example, even if you don't have a residence permit and you don't have a car and don't need it, you'll still have some visitor permits, or you can buy visitor passes, day pass at the same rate as coupon for when your family's coming for the weekend or other things, to make sure that there is that flexibility, as well as the unmarked spaces which are there. At the moment, we will be putting in a cap of 85% of those available spaces. So if we have the 2,300 marked spaces, we will be allocating 85% of them. I can't work out exactly what that number is in my head. And then making sure that there's that flexibility, and that's to ensure that people are able to find a park. At the moment, we've oversubscribed the residence permits in this area. And the annual fee will follow the standard residence annual fee. So I'll move into questions on this.
Cool. Sweet. So Councillor Abdurrahman. Because we've only got 15 minutes, can you keep your questions succinct? And let's just do one question each, and then if you want to jump back on the list, you can.
We got only 15 minutes for this.
So this is just questions about this the parking
Actually,
management plan.
In that case, I do need separate, when it comes to the Berhampur one, discussion with the officers, and I don't have any question now.
Okay, yep, and Vita, you were saying yesterday that you were happy to meet with councillors and have a chat about their specific things. Councillor Free.
At one point, I know the hospital board, before it was disbanded, approved having a parking building on hospital land for their staff and patients and what have you. Is there any chance of following up and finding out if that's still on the table?
So we're working really closely with the hospital. They've got their travel action plan as well, which they're looking at implementing and working with their staff around. And one of the things is that they'll be looking at their on-site parking as well. And then you might have seen in the numbers, we do have around 5,000 people that commute every day into the hospital, but 80% of hospital staff are actually working sort of a 9 to 5 standard shift.
Councillor Brown.
It does seem to me that we actually need to provide off-street car parking to replace some of the on-street that we're removing. I mean, is that part of our thinking at all?
So in Newtown and Berhampur, there isn't demand to need to do any parking buildings at this stage. There's over 5,000 parks on the streets at the moment. So as a whole, there are pockets where we've got high occupancy rates, but there's also pockets where we've got really low occupancy rates. So as a whole, the suburb at the moment does not require additional parking.
Councillor Matthews.
Yeah, my question is really just about the applicability of what this work in other suburbs, and does this mean we'll be, this is the thinking that we'll be able to do very similar and maybe more quickly in other places?
Yes, so this is implementing the parking policy from 2020, and so we're doing Newtown now. The next one on the list is Wadestown, and they're two quite different areas. So we've decided to do those two first, and then we can understand if the scheme, we want to have a base scheme that's continuous across the whole city. So we're going to do these two different areas, and then come back and say, actually, we think there's changes needed or not.
Councillor Pennant, online.
Thank you, Vita. Look, you won't be surprised to hear that I'm actually quite concerned about this. There's far too much parking for a very inner city suburb, and I foresaw this when we passed our parking policy. So the question really is, and a very heavy reliance on MRT, can we reduce the numbers of parks and actually use it for street trees and places for kids to play in?
Potentially, I mean, there's always chance. Street trees could well be planted. At the moment, we don't have any budgets to do that. But if we look at the zone, there's 8,300 residences currently within these zones, and as I said, there will, in the next 30 years, we're expecting that grow by another 1,500. So that is as the suburb grows, there will begin to get pressure on parking in this area, but we're setting a baseline now and trying to set it up so it works, and that when people move into the area, they move into the area well knowing that there's a limit to how much parking there is available. But it is one of the suburbs as well with the highest car share membership. It's one of the suburbs with the highest walking, the highest cycling and public transport use. So I think people already choose the suburb for that.
Cool. All right. Councillor Abdurrahman.
Cool. I'll keep the rest of the question for later on, but for now, Vida, what I want to ask is what it looks like if councillors want to feed into the question of this consultation. Also, if we wanted something to be included in the consultation, when can we do that, and is that possible?
So the questions we get done by people that that's their job, is to write questions, and there's quite an art to how we do that question making, but we're happy to run through what those questions are with you so you can have a look at that. But we've tried to tailor it so that we can get information which we can ensure can inform the scheme and can inform you in your decision making. But we're happy to show them to you and have a chat to them. But it is going live on the 12th. So we are finalising everything right now so that it goes live.
The only thing is I would love to see that at the same time while we're making the streets safe for our people who want to bike, which we are committed to, which we should do. It would be good to include it in the consultation if the community is still looking at the option of having a car park around.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Fu.
Yeah, kia ora. So just checking that the annual permit is per residence at $195 per annum?
It's per permit.
Per permit.
At $195. So if up to 2 per household can be issued, so that would be
great,
around $400.
And just factoring in with a hardship, is there any way, are we thinking about staggering that, or can people feed that back as part of the submission process?
I have to look over to, can people pay monthly or 6 monthly? Or?
At the moment, we don't normally offer part payment for things like permits. We do offer payment options for infringements, but that's something that can be looked at. But at the moment, we typically expect people to pay up front.
Right, thanks, Kevin.
And I do know that 50% of this current car parking spaces will still be unrestricted, so therefore free parking. It might just not be right outside your house.
Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. And ditto re Newtown with Karori. I'd like to see what your planning on asking beforehand as well would be helpful in the submission, in the consultation. I'm just curious, obviously this is a holistic plan. If you're looking at the parking management, you're looking at the streetscape. So why is it coming to not a committee of the whole, but to the Regulatory Processes Committee, presumably as a traffic resolution?
Because this is the first parking management plan, we are going to be coming to a committee of the whole for the parking management plan TR decision. It's going to be referred on from the Regs Committee.
And will that include the cycleway?
No.
Why would you? Because it's all together. Why would you separate them out?
So that they are separate processes. The reason for this parking management plan is because it is the first one we've dealt with, and therefore we thought it was important to have that conversation of the whole.
Would officers reconsider that so that we can have a holistic and cohesive look at the changes to the same streets?
So that's not our recommended approach.
Okay, so but we as the governing council could determine how that is presented to us in terms of the agendas. We could help shape that. Would that be right? We're able to do that. We don't need to have officers' permission to do that.
I don't.
If you get enough votes.
Well,
through you, Madam Chair, from a governance point of view, it's a case of just referring it to the committee of the whole. But I think the key point here is you've already made the policy decision in 2020 to do the car parking policy, and the way and approach that Vita's taken, it's a really delivery into the business. So we're just saying to you, it's the first one under the policy adopted in 2020, so we will take it to the whole. The TR processes are, as you know, Paniki Poniki, we've adopted the network, we're getting on and delivering it. So that's what the regulatory committee has been given and delegated that task to do, and we're cracking on and doing it.
So basically the council, the ones in charge, can determine how it's being presented to whichever committee.
That goes for everything that we do. Okay, Councillor Chung.
Thank you. The parking permits, are they standard across the whole city so that people can park in different areas, not just in their home area, or are they staggered in different?
No, they're for your zone, but the pricing is the same across the whole city.
Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you.
When we did the Miramar parking scheme, we had a big long debate about whether they should actually only have one permit per household as a norm, and that's a decision we made, and actually it has proved to be okay. So I'm wondering if there are any thoughts been given to just the one permit per household as the norm and a higher price if you have to, or you don't have off-street parking at all to qualify for a second.
So what we're proposing in the consultation is a lift out of the parking policy, so it's exactly what's written in the parking policy. But that was what I was saying with the area-based parking policy. There is chances for tweaks to make it relevant to the local context. Want to hear the community on what was adopted through the parking policy, and then when we hear that feedback, you'll be able to make decisions about if you want to make area-specific changes.
So will we ask a question about whether that's right to have, whether 2 is actually the right number?
I'm getting a yes from over there, from Ollie.
We are asking about those.
Yeah, thank you. And whether even about the differential pricing aspect, it gets a bit more expensive if you want the...
We only can do cost recovery, so we are legally obliged to only do cost recovery for residents.
Right, thank you.
Shall we move on? Yep. Okay, just was through. So now we're going to take you through the 2 next Paniki Poniki projects. So these 2 projects are exciting because they create our first connected routes in the city. We're starting to see some of the results from the ones we've put in. We're getting a lot of great feedback on Cambridge, but our counters are also showing we could see a 92% increase this August compared to last August, and we can't find any reason why we think those numbers are dodgy. So we're really excited about some of the results. I don't know if you saw the resident satisfaction survey recently, but we also saw a 10% jump in how easy people were finding it to get around by bike in the city, and that was after a steady decline since 2017. So I think this work is paying off, but these are our first 2 actually connected routes. So I would expect to see good jumps, a scale higher than we've seen after we connect them. So I'm presenting today on behalf of Nicola Mitchell, our project manager. Both her and our engagement lead are both on a very well-deserved holiday and prep before consultation next week, so there may be some things I can't answer on this one, but we can get back to you. We've also got our city streets, Let's Get Wellington Moving colleagues here, and our MetLink colleagues might also show up at some point because both of these projects have been made. Oh, great, Alex, perfect timing. So we really wanted them to be here so that you could see that these 2 projects have both been designed alongside these 2 partners since the beginning. Oops, I'm pushing bad buttons. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Did he want to ask a question? Oh, sorry. Okay, so just a reminder where we're at with these 2 projects. We've been in the discovery phase. For Karori, we've been working with the community since April. For Beremport and Newtown, we've been working for 12 months, but really for years on this particular route. It's the final gap between the Island Bay Cycleway. So what we've been doing until now is getting a lot of that design feedback that's been synthesised into the designs that have been iterating every day. I know Jonathan was making 20 changes yesterday, so they've been really changing all the way. We've had hundreds of pieces of feedback, and we're now ready with our proposed design to go out to the wider public for feedback. So here's the route for Beremport and Newtown. It's basically the gap. So it includes a small section of Ridderford Street between Mean Street and the bottom of Rintle. Up Rintle, it includes Luxford and Adelaide down to basically Wakefield Park, D Street roundabout. So what we have, some of the things that have been coming out through our community engagement to date, MetLink have sort of highlighted that along this route, buses can find it really hard on Rintle Street to pass each other. They can often have to sit and wait for each other to get by. We've also spoken quite a bit to the school and the rest home. So Swiss is a really big intermediate school on this route, and there's the Arvida rest home as well. So they've sort of talked about pedestrian safety in the area and the speed that cars go along here. There are safety concerns, and this came out really loudly in the baseline survey, of people at that Luxford Rintle corner, where there's a circle. That's quite a dangerous intersection, and people reported quite a lot of near misses at that intersection, which surprised us. And then we had comments, we've been working alongside the Beremport Town Centre upgrades here, so Brennan's been working in a co-design kind of way with the shops for a while, and so we've incorporated some of the street safety concerns into this as well. And then obviously we heard about the sort of cyclist conditions at the moment on Adelaide Road. If you've ridden down there, this is a really narrow corridor, pretty unpleasant. You've often got buses waiting or cars behind you. There's not a lot of room for everybody. And we've heard a lot from the park, the sports clubs down at Wakefield Park. So we've had quite a few conversations with them, and we can sort of talk about how we've addressed their concerns in a minute. So, in summary, these are the changes that we're proposing. For people on the bus, it's mostly focused on the bus stops. So we will be spacing some of these bus stops, which is something that we do with MetLink's advice, looking at kind of a rationalised bus stop arrangement. So Let's Get Wellington Moving actually did the analysis for this bus stop rationalisation, and we've just picked up their results and put it into the design. It also includes some more in-lane bus stops, and the bus stops are moving to be more paired. So there's one that's really close together down around the Wakefield Park area, and that'll move so that it's actually right outside the park, but we're removing one from down there. So that's the bus movements. These, we've tried to summarise the bike changes, but basically where we've got an uphill, we're trying to get a bike lane in. So up Rintle Street, and Rintle Street actually has an uphill on different directions. So up from Ridderford to the high point around the Wakefield Hospital, and then it goes down. So we've got bike lanes on both of the uphills. There's bike lanes on both sides of Luxford Street, which is flat. We then have a 30k shared area in that business shopping district, and that's allowed us to retain most of the parking there. We then have bike lanes in the uphill direction, and on the flat we've got them on both sides of the road. That we've also and this is addressing that dangerous intersection at Rintle and Luxford. We're proposing to restrict the right-hand turn from Luxford into Rintle, sorry. So people would have to find a different route to get into that part of Rintle. Any just questions for clarification while this one's up? Yeah.
Thanks for that. The intersection from Luxford Street into Rintle Street.
Yes.
Is that dangerous because it turns there, or is it because it turns it ahead? And where is the dangerous point?
There's a right-hand turn bay at the moment, and cars are turning right when people are coming around the corner quite quickly, and there's not a very good visibility sight line for that right-hand turn. So quite a number of people have reported a near miss at that intersection. So when we put the bike lane in around that corner, we actually don't have space anymore for the right turn bay, but it also means that we've eliminated that conflict of the right turning traffic zipping over.
There are traffic lights at that intersection, aren't there?
No,
okay.
It's where it's like on the way to Te Wharepori Street. So yeah, it's not the traffic lights. It's the other side of Luxford. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, questions of clarification about this slide. Councillor Pennant.
Thanks, Vida, and great to see that this gap's being finally filled. My question is always around the removal of bus stops. What justification is being given for that in terms of having a good level of service for bus users, of which there will be the majority in this area?
Sorry, Iona, that...
Sorry, Claire, not Vida. Apologies.
Yeah, so the spacing, and Alex, do you want to come and join? I'll just bring Alex from Metlink up because we take a lot of advice in this space, but basically best practice gaps for bus stops are 400 metres between them, and I think we had in this situation some bus stops, particularly down at Wakefield Park, that were much, much closer together. So we've tried to locate them. There was also the 2 bus stops that join in Berhampore Town Centre. Do you want to talk to that one?
Yeah, there's a number of different changes in here. As Claire noted, the initial work on this was done by Let's Get Willie Moving, looking at the long-term view that ultimately with mass rapid transit, there'd be stations every 500 to 600 metres. So we're not pushing for that leap, but it was looking at giving effect to the Bus Priority Action Plan, which our councillors have endorsed in 2019. But Metlink also has a public transport accessibility charter from 2021. And so we're looking not just at the spacing of the stops, but the accessibility of the stops. So it's not enough just to say there's a stop every 100 or 200 metres, but if the bus can't pull in up to the curb, if people can't, in a wheelchair with a pram, can't get on that bus without stepping out into the road, the stop is not accessible. So we try to take a holistic view where we look at the spacing, but where the stops are positioned relative to pedestrian crossings, how the stops are designed in terms of having adequate lead-ins and lead-outs so the bus can actually get up to the curb and give accessible access. Now, the stop positions being consulted from a Metlink position, this is taking the technical approach. This team is now doing the consultation, and as with other areas like the Brooklyn connections, we look at the feedback and then we make further adjustments where required.
Great, thank you, Alex.
Can I just clarify how many bus stops you're removing across the city, and you maybe could come back to me and other councillors at the time?
Thank you. Yeah, cool. So I've got Deputy Mayor Foon and Councillor Wineta on the list, but maybe should we just
should we get through them? Okay, I just want to make sure. So we've got a few renders here. This just shows some pictures of what it will look like with the bike lane on one side. We're also raising a lot of the pedestrian crossings. We'll talk about that in a second. But as Alex mentioned, the accessibility for the bus stops is something that will be improved with the in-lane bus stops. So at the moment on Rental Street, a bus kind of parks as best it can in on the road, which sometimes means the back end of it isn't actually up against the curb, whereas these in-lane bus stops will mean a bus will be completely flush against the bus stop, which makes it much easier for people to get on and off. Here are the pedestrian improvements. So both this project and Karori have significant pedestrian improvements. This one has a number of new raised crossings, and a lot of these were actually in response to that community feedback. So the Rest Home and Swiss are thrilled with this plan. They're really looking forward to having a safer walking route for their kids to get to school. But we've got them along Rental and along Adelaide, and a new one down by the park as well. So here are some more renders. Rental is obviously a pretty constrained street, so there's we are retaining parking in the downhill direction. We are retaining some parking on all of these streets, but the uphill direction of the bike lane on Rental, that whole side gets replaced by a bike lane. The bottom right photo there is what we're proposing as some off-street parking down by Dover Street in response to the Wakefield Park Sports Club's concerns, and we've been working with the parks team on this because this park is a very unique park in the region. It's the only place that has two turfs next to each other, so it has all season incredibly high usage. So we're working with them on some parking solutions which should lead to a net zero loss in car parking around the park. But we'll come back to you for a decision on that in December. And then just finally, so you know, there are upgrades that are happening separately from our urban design public space team are working in Berhampore Town Centre, and we've been working alongside them so that they're doing all the off-street stuff, more seating, more bike parks, more space for the businesses to flow out here. And we've picked up on some of the street concerns and incorporated them into making the town centre of Berhampore slower and more people-friendly. We've also been working with Let's Get Wellington Moving, so Ashwin is here as the project manager of this project, which is looking at the next steps before MRT here. So there are some areas along the route we've identified might require more permanent changes before MRT still. So we're going to use this consultation to elicit some feedback from the community on those particular areas, and that feedback will help inform Let's Get Wellington Moving on next steps there as well. So finally, we've been continuing through our co-design workshops with mana whenua to identify sites of significance along these routes, and there is an unnamed awa on Rental Street that will be marked as part of this project. So yeah, there's not too many on this route, but that was the one that got identified. So impacts, there are obviously impacts to these changes. One of the biggest will be along those streets, it will be harder for people to find a park. However, the reason we're going alongside the new town parking management plan is the impact on residents and short stay visitors really gets mitigated by bringing that scheme in. And we know there is enough parking in these zones, and if residents can get some more assurance that those parks are for them rather than for commuters, we think that'll mitigate the impacts of the parking removal along here. So that's why in Newtown West, the zone where this route goes through, we've got up to 70% of the streets in that area that will become this P120 residents exempt. Whereas down in Berhampore, it's more like 30% because there's more capacity in those side streets. So we've been working together to get that balance right. catching the bus, that better, we should see an improvement in bus travel times and accessibility at the stops. We'll obviously see a massive level of service jump from a cycling perspective and from a pedestrian perspective. We think we've mitigated the impact on Wakefield Park with that off-street parking provision. And the town centre, obviously the town centre upgrades benefit the businesses. There will be a small number of parks lost or reallocated to different areas, on a little bit on Ridderford and some in the Berhamport area as well. So consultation starts next Tuesday. We've got a large number of drop-ins for this project. We're going to be consulting on these two projects together, and we will have all the information at those drop-ins. Got the normal kind of web content which will be up, walking people through the changes mode by mode. The parking plan's got a really cool tool that people can see what their street will look like from a parking scheme perspective, and we've got quite a bit of targeted consultation with the hospital as well planned. So that's everything for this. Happy to take questions on that now.
Awesome, thank you. So we've got about 5 minutes for questions on this section, so please keep your questions succinct. Deputy Mayor Foon.
Thanks, Claire. Just the 30k zone through Berhamport Town Centre, that hasn't worked so far. So what are these specific things that will help reduce speed through there to enable shared zones?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, I should say we are proposing to extend that 30k along Luxford as well. There are a number of traffic calming things coming in. So there's going to be a speed hump we're proposing in the slip lane on Rintle Street. We're also going to be putting speed humps outside the the petrol station, which is one of the areas that came up through community engagement. And we are planning to raise the pedestrian crossing at the intersection into the Berhamport Town Centre on the Island Bay side. We'll also be adding a new pedestrian leg so that all four corners of that intersection have crossings, because at the moment it's missing a leg on the town side. So, yeah, there's a number of things that should help bring the speed down.
Councillor Wineta.
So, first of all, can I just clarify, so that you can no longer turn right onto Luxford, is that right?
You wouldn't be able to turn from Luxford into Rintle.
Oh, I see.
The upper bit of Rintle, the southern end of Rintle.
Oh, yeah, but you can still travel
100%,
from Adelaide to Luxford and then up Rintle.
Yeah,
Sweet.
and that's the main bike route, and we're making it a lot easier for bikes to make that right turn, because at the moment it's a really tricky manoeuvre.
Cool. Councillor Free.
Hey, thank you. I think it looks great, actually. My only question is about the fare zone boundary. Is it possible to line the fare zone boundary up with the new bus stop?
The new bus stops will line up with the fare zone boundary.
Oh, Alex, you know how long that's been a little thing in my wish list. Oh, thank you.
Awesome. Councillor Calvert.
Just looking at the feedback last year over the overall bike plan, and I looked at who came from Newtown, Berhamport, Island Bay. So there's 246 submissions and only 54%, which is 133 roughly, were in support. So how do you think the community is going to respond to this?
I don't know. I would hate to kind of anticipate, but we will get a lot more responses than that with an actual proposal. It's pretty normal that at a high level, it's not till you get the detail on someone's street that you start to get the real volume and feedback. So I think we will get, potentially up to 1,000. We will ask them specifically that question we always ask them, which is, do you support the proposed changes? So we'll get a good sense through that of how people feel.
And just one thing is, you talked about the engagement is going to happen together between the parking management and this. So again, I just reiterate the point is that we really do need to, when it comes back to council, consider these things together, because we're carrying out the engagement together. So it doesn't seem right to separate them.
Yeah, I'll leave that to my higher aboves.
Cool. All right, noted. Councillor Abdurrahman.
Cool. I think, again, as you said, how you find out if the community is on board on it or not. Is do you support? As far as I know, a lot of the community members, they do support the cycle lane, but they also want to see some during this transition period how some improvement can happen. So asking that black and white question is going to be a challenge. That's why I actually ask if we can have an input into the questioning, because this area especially, the biggest number of people who they bike. This is Southern Waters, I think, is one of the biggest cycling community. They live in that area. It's also car park is a big challenge. So if you ask a lot of the community in this area, they are very pro bicycling. I'm not saying there are some people who are not against. Of course, they are rightfully. They have their own reasonings. However,
okay,
the question is what can we do?
Yeah.
Is that is not there, and how can we include that question, and that can be reflective of the support?
Yeah, so that question, do you support, is important for us at a high level, and I think it is useful to get general sentiment on the whole proposal, but we do then break the project into sections, and so people will get asked questions street by street, and the changes will be outlined, including the parking removal, so it will all be really clear to people that they get this at the expense of that, and they get asked, do they support section by section? Yeah, so they will get that granular level support as well as an overall feeling.
Cool. To make my question clear, because I think it's not answered even though you touched it, what I'm saying is, would you able to consider to ask communities, do you support? Yes. Do you support car park building to be built, example?
I think we would have to know whether we had the ability to deliver on that, because my understanding is that's not our policy or strategy. So we wouldn't want people to comment on something they couldn't influence because it's not within our realm of what we're doing. But I don't know,
yeah,
Liam.
I mean, that would, Councillor, that would be my comment. You can't ask questions you don't have answers for. I mean, we're effectively consulting on a 2020 parking policy, and we're implementing it now. It didn't include building car parking buildings from memory, so. But the hospital might, as per Vita's earlier answer before, there are clearly at-grade parking at the hospital within the grounds. It's up to the hospital to consider the impact on their workers of this parking management plan and act accordingly. As Vita's indicated, we are working very closely with the hospital. They have an internal group that works on mode shift that were part of the Newtown Cycleway consultation. And that is really, the mandate for this team. It's to deliver on that parking management plan, and it's not necessarily to ask questions around, do we need an additional car parking building off street?
One thing I would just say is that the the plan that will be published on Tuesday also shows with the surveys that we do see a lot of commuter parking behaviour along these streets that we're removing, and so we anticipate that new parking scheme will really help reduce the demand of parking on that street, which is currently demanded for commuter purposes, quite a lot of it, which should be very helpful in kind of allowing those residents to have more space for them to park. So that's the key mitigation of the removal here.
Okay, I think that's really clear. So, Councillor Randall. Sorry, Councillor, we're going to move on now. Councillor Randall.
Thank you. First of all, in terms of the consultation, will there be a paper version of the survey form?
Yes, there will.
Okay, thanks. Will there be information on the current parking usage?
Yes, yeah, so both, it's actually 3 parking management plans that will be published. So one for Karori, one for the Newtown Berempore scheme, and then one, a very small one, for the Wakefield Park area, which was outside of the scheme zone. So we did a little mini one, which will have all the occupancy data and all of those.
Okay, so you're consulting on a parking management plan for Karori at the same time?
No.
Or are you just publishing the...
Yeah, we just that's a supporting document. So we do all that analysis to understand impact and kind of whether we should be including P30s or P60s, and it's a supporting document. We're not actually consulting on the parking management plan.
Okay, so we're getting ahead because you are consulting on the Karori cycleways but not the parking management plan.
Yeah, sorry, I should just clarify this. In Newtown and Berempore, we're introducing a whole new area-wide residence scheme, and that is what we're consulting on alongside the bike project. In Karori, we're just consulting on the walk, bike and bus changes, but we've done some analysis of the impacts on the parking that is one of the documents that will be publicly shared. But we're not introducing a new resident scheme or anything into Karori.
Okay. And there's a question more for, I guess, Metlink. What is the impact on the bus service in terms of travel time through that area?
For Karori?
No, for the Newtown for the number one bus going up and down this, because you're going to have speed humps. Bus. I mean, is the service going to be faster, slower?
It hasn't been modelled, and it is a trial. The key for us is currently we have significant side friction for buses where they have to give way to buses coming the other way. They have to wait. This project provides passing areas to improve that, reduce that side friction for buses. So we're not getting dedicated lanes, which obviously would be the ideal we would love to see, but we are getting small improvements that should improve the flow of buses. I don't think anyone has quantified what the time would be.
I mean, there are things. Buses getting held up on the uphill behind bikes because there's nowhere for buses to pass them on this route at the moment, and we'll see a reduction in those kind of delays. But we are tracking with Metlink the impacts on bus travel times, so we will find out.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to, there's other people on the list and we need to move on soon, so I'm going to go to Councillor McNulty online.
So just a very quick question from the last one. And I think you ended up answering it for Councillor Free. What's the revenue impact of the parking management plan in Newtown? Is it a net benefit for council? How does that calculate?
So we're introducing a residence parking permits, and that is cost recovery only. So we just recover the costs it takes us to administer it, and then it'll be P120, which is still free. So it will be cost neutral. There'll be no income from it.
Thank you.
Councillor Chung, and then we'll move on to the Karori part.
I'm looking at the off-street car parking that you're actually putting at Wakefield Park. How many cars, how many parks would you have there, and would that adequately cover the removal of the ones on the street?
Yeah, so in the park area, we're working with parks to investigate around 15 new angled parks on Dover Street, which is a little side street in Island Bay next to the park. In total, we're losing 23 parks in the area of Wakefield Park, and we're looking to find 15 more of those on Dover Street, and then we are looking at reconfiguring the top car park to make up the rest. So there's a chance we even might end up with slightly more than we've got right now, but we're just working on the final design of that, or it's not the final, we're working through the design on that top car park at the moment. We're aiming for net zero loss.
Okay, thanks. So let's move on to the Karori part of this presentation. And if your question hasn't been answered on these areas, you can always send an email to get the answers that you need. Yeah.
We'll move on. My little clicker has stopped working. Is there a reason that it will have done that? Here we go. Jonathan's going to speak to this one. Alex, it might be good if you stick around because this has a lot of bus route improvements. So I'll hand over to Jonathan and he can take you through this one.
Thanks. Thanks very much. So Karori Connections. I think it's worth starting off by stating that this project is a combination of projects. We're taking on board the needs of Greater Wellington to increase the bus capacity by 52%, and we're also delivering some of the Let's Get Wellington Moving targeted improvements in this project, as well as the cycle network. So there's a lot of changes for the bus, for pedestrians and for cyclists. So we've been having just one joined up conversation with the community, and we've had one set of designers doing the designs for all of the components of this project, and we intend to go out with contractors as one project as well, so that the public don't get frustrated by us digging up the road 3 times. The route starts at the Botanic Gardens Ki Paikaka. It goes up Glenmore Street, then through the tunnel, then up Chater Street to Karori Road and all the way along Karori Road to the bus turnaround area at the end of Karori Road. That's what we call the main route or the primary route. I think you're probably familiar with the secondary routes. This is just to remind you that they aren't part of the consultation that's coming up, but there are three secondary routes. One goes up Birdwood Street, which was approved by Council 2 weeks ago. One goes down from the bus turnaround area down South Karori Road to the mountain bike park, which was also approved 2 weeks ago. And there's a route going from Karori Park along back streets to the Marsden shopping area, and that didn't require a traffic resolution as it's just signs and lines and a couple of speed humps. So through engagement so far, we've heard from a lot of organisations and individuals, and you can see on the board here that we've been gathering together quite a lot of important information that's been fed into the design. So starting from the Botanic Gardens, there's been an importance of transport options, a range of transport options to the Botanic Gardens. And so car parking, visitor car parking has been seen as being a priority outside the gardens. We have a couple of unusual things happening in this project in that we need to widen the road around the Horseshoe Bend on Glenmore Street so that buses can track around the bend there easier. This is probably a good time to point out that Greater Wellington are looking at introducing articulated buses. So those are longer buses to the Karori route. They want to increase their capacity, and they can't do that by introducing double-decker buses, because the double-decker buses won't fit through the tunnels. They're too high. So articulated buses are the solution that we're heading towards, and they'll be trialling those later on this month. They'll be bringing an articulated bus down from Auckland and driving back and forth on the route with cameras strapped all over it to actually test the desktop analysis. We're having a couple of shared paths. Probably the main one that I'll point out later on is through Appleton Park, and there's a counterintuitive change on Chater Street, where it was recommended that we remove about 260 metres of bus lane on Chater Street so that an uphill cycle lane could be installed, and that means that buses don't have to sit behind slow cyclists going uphill on Chater Street, whereas obviously they weren't having any problems sitting behind slow cyclists going down Chater Street, so that will be an overall advantage to the buses. I won't go through all of the points. I'll move along because you're bound to have questions later on. So on Glenmore Street, the top right photo shows what it will look like outside the Botanic Gardens. So we have a cycle lane against the curb, and then concrete separators without the posts, and then cars parked along outside the gardens, and then two lanes of traffic. It's worth noting that all of the traffic lanes along this whole route have to be wide enough for articulated buses. So the traffic lanes won't have any pinch points on them at all. And most of the treatment on Glenmore Street will be what you can see on the left-hand image. Heading along to Chater Street, the first 440 metres of the Chater Street cycleway will go through the Appleton Park as a shared path. We think that'll be pretty popular. And then heading up Chater Street, which is currently the worst part of the cycle route home, will be a separated cycleway in the uphill direction, with cyclists sharing the traffic lane in the downhill direction, which will be the same for all of the downhills. And the last section is Karori Road. There are a few different treatments along Karori Road. But I think one of the main things to note is that all of the existing pedestrian crossings, which is where half of the pedestrian crashes happen at the moment, all of those pedestrian crossings will be raised up, and so that traffic has to slow down before it goes over the pedestrian crossing, making it much more likely that when a pedestrian is hit, as may happen in the future, that they're more likely to survive the impact. We're also looking at introducing 3 new raised safety platforms. 3 of them are just approaching the main Karori shopping centre. That's the middle image there. You can see on the left there's a raised safety platform across Campbell Street. There's a retirement village just up the road and a school just beyond that. And we've had complaints from people at the retirement village that it's difficult for them to get across the road currently there. So that's a really important improvement for those pedestrians. And then we'll have a raised safety platform across Karori Road, because we've heard from businesses that the traffic goes too fast through the shopping area. So we want that busy shopping area to actually slow, for the traffic to slow down. And we also have one on Rain Street, just before the shops as well. So that'll be quite a different feel for the Karori shopping area. Now, before I move on away from these renders, I just thought there might be some questions about a particular street or road.
Well, if it's all right with you, we're actually going to just finish this section and then ask questions about this whole Karori connection.
At the end, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so there's currently 32 bus stops along the route. This is the number 2 bus route, which is one of the busiest bus routes in the city. And we've been working with Greater Wellington to design up quite a few changes to these. On Glenmore Street, a couple of in-lane bus stops will be built, and there'll be 3 in-lane bus stops built along Karori Road as well. And most of the bus stops have to be lengthened to take the articulated buses so that they can actually fit. And we have to sometimes remove 1 or 2 car parks before or after so that the articulated buses can get into the stops and out of the stops. We're also looking at relocating some bus stops. So overall, that will mean the removal of 1 bus stop on Glenmore Street and 4 bus stops on Karori Road, so that we get closer to having that ideal spacing of 400 metres between bus stops, which I think Alex mentioned earlier. That will mean that the bus can move a bit more efficiently through along the number 2 route. The walking changes, as I mentioned before, we're raising all of the existing pedestrian crossings and installing 3 new crossings, and putting also in some median refuge crossings as well. So the overall impacts for the convenience of people driving and parking, there'll be quite a significant reduction in on-street parking along the route. There'll also be reduced delays for people driving uphill. They won't have to wait behind cyclists when driving uphill anymore, and slightly longer travel times due to the 5 in-lane bus stops and the raised pedestrian crossings. I should mention that as a part of this project, we have identified that unfortunately we'll have to remove the in-lane bus stop on Tenakori Road, just around the corner from Bowen Street, because it won't work to have 3 in a row just after that signalised intersection. For bus users, obviously there's improvements for bus users, especially those with disabilities. The buses will find it easier to get right in against the curb, so people in a wheelchair or a Zimmer frame will be able to get onto the bus much easier. And we'll be able to increase the bus capacity as well, so there's less likelihood of buses going past people because they're full. And buses won't get held up by cyclists going uphill. There'll be better connections for the shared paths. In particular, probably the most significant one is the shared path through Appleton Park, which is a park that's not used very much at all at the moment. For businesses and schools, it's worth noting that there'll be minimal impact on the business areas because we're removing hardly any car parks directly in front of businesses. So there are a couple of exceptions. They're very minor. One of them is in the Marsden shops. One car park has to be removed in front of a bus stop so that the bus can get out of the bus stop. And it's also proposed to change one car park to 6 bike parks. And then at the Karori Mall, the change there is that the whole of the area in front of the Karori Mall, which is currently a bus stop, that bus stop will be lengthened, and so the whole of that block will just be for buses. So that means a couple of taxi stands will have to go around the corner, and a few time-limited car parks will have to go around the corner as well. I think that's about it, really. Let's see what we've got on the next slide. Yes, the sites of significance. There are quite a few awa being marked out along this route where there are underground streams. So those will be marked out, and where they have a name, we'll put the name beside the awa markings. So the consultation is running in line with the other projects. It's starting on the 12th of September and ending on the 8th of October. We'll be having 3 drop-in sessions. There's one change just being made today to the Karori Library Drop-in Centre. We're going to add another engagement activity earlier in the afternoon at the community centre. So there'll actually be 2 events happening on that day, just so that we can spread the load and provide an opportunity for people who aren't working. They might want to come in the afternoon.
Awesome. Sweet. Thanks, Jonathan. So questions, and we'll start with Deputy Mayor Foon.
Kia ora, and this actually is a question for Alex. Just juggling the bus priority, bike priority, how has that been for you, and are you satisfied with the results where we're landing?
So
on both projects, actually.
So our starting point again on this is the Bus Priority Action Plan, and the key section of this lists a number of interventions and recommendations. The transitional cycleways have basically ticked off all of the early works opportunities to make improvements on this corridor. So it has a very strong alignment with that key document. We have worked very closely on things like the stop positioning. So what, for instance, is a pair of bus stops near the Huntley Retirement Village. There was initially concern at removing a pair of stops. We've been able to now consolidate 2 pairs of stops and end up with a stop that will be closer to the front door of the retirement village. The other piece that probably seems counterintuitive is the loss of a section of downhill bus lane. But that was informed by a combination of talking with current and former bus drivers, looking at our data for bus congestion, and that the current lane was frankly ineffective. It was too narrow, it didn't accommodate the swept paths, so buses effectively weren't using it or getting benefit from it. So what was presented by getting the uphill cycle lane, buses weren't getting stuck behind, wouldn't be stuck behind the travelling slowly behind cyclists, so that overall on balance that would deliver a benefit. Now obviously the longer term opportunities have been identified for more significant bus lane interventions, but those are, I understand, to be considered as part of the Let's Get Welly Moving tranche 2.
Oh, thanks, Alex. Councillor Chung.
Great, thanks. Inquiry regarding the secondary route. Sorry, Jonathan. You on the map you had down, it runs along Friend Street. So does that run into Ranley Street? And are there going to be any car parks removed there? And is there going to be a cycle lane along Ranley and Friend, or is it just left as an open street?
It's left as an open street with sharrows on the road. The traffic volumes are quite low on those roads. There's one section where the traffic volumes are a bit higher, and that's where we'll install a couple of extra speed humps to slow traffic down there. We are installing 6 metres of no stopping lines.
Okay, and is that going to be around, where the where it comes into Friend Street where there's a bus terminal at the moment. That's quite a tricky corner there with the buses coming in and out all the time.
Yeah.
So how will the cycle lanes go around that area where the buses are?
That's actually where the 6 metres of no stopping lines are being installed to improve the sight lines around that corner and make it so that cyclists can keep up against the curb rather than closer to where the terminal is.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Randall.
Yes, thank you. In terms, so first of all, is there going to be a paper version of the survey? Okay, just want to make sure. In terms of the decision around the articulated buses, how is that going to be made? When is it going to be made, and will it be subject to public consultation?
So currently that's a preferred option. It still has a process to go through. Greater Wellington Council haven't yet resolved it. The articulated bus decision ultimately is very dependent on, we cannot order those buses if we do not have the infrastructure in place from one end of the corridor to the other. So we have to work with, obviously, Wellington City Council as a road controlling authority, Wakakatahi, City Streets, Let's Get Welly Moving. There's a number of different projects and pieces that we will be looking at as well. And with or without that decision on articulated buses, we are committed to providing the capacity required on this corridor. For instance, from January next year, from term 1 next year, we're looking to add capacity for an additional 860 passengers from Karori in the morning peak. I'd have to get information back to you on the exact stages and steps for that 2026.
I'm especially interested in when will the decision be made. So I guess in terms of the
24, I believe, is when the final decision needs to be made by our council to procure the buses.
Okay, so given that the buses aren't going to be procured to 2024, so while I understand that you want to design the route with bus stops that can hold articulated buses, is it the correct decision to actually put space as if there is an articulated bus on the route?
Yeah, so the view on this was taken with future-proofing the route with the stops that would allow for articulated buses, but if we don't have articulated buses, the double-length bus stops mean that we can accommodate platooning existing buses. So instead of only having one bus and the other one's stuck, we can accommodate 2 buses simultaneously. So it's effectively future-proofs us for 2 different pathways.
Okay, and the other last question, why do we not put on more buses? Why are articulated buses even being considered?
So the answer first is we are putting more buses on. As I said, we are looking at 9 additional peak buses will be being put on, which is additional capacity from term 1 next year. That's what we're working towards at the moment with the operator for Karori alone. And if we are unable to get through the steps to do articulated buses, then the default is we just keep adding additional large vehicles. The MCA process, which we carried out in conjunction with Wellington City Council officers and Wakakatahi and Let's Get Welly Moving, identified articulated buses as the preferred option given the alternatives. For instance, just putting more large buses on, effectively, we're already running buses as close as every 4 minutes in the peak now with suspended services. And when we keep adding more large buses, we get platooning of buses. So you lose the benefit of additional frequency because you just have 2, 3, 4 buses all platooning in a line. And that's adding to congestion, obviously, for the Golden Mile, Central City and other key crunch points in the network. So as I say, out of that MCA process, and that MCA document is available, and that articulated buses were the preferred option to address that medium to longer term capacity requirement.
Could you send me a copy of it, please? Thanks.
Councillor Matthews.
I'm excited about this extra bus capacity. But I guess I just wanted to ask about loss of on-street car parking and what analysis of, have we looked at, do we need to take any mitigating steps with the existing on-street parking, or, if not, kind of why not, that kind of question.
So we have a parking management plan that will be released next week. The summary is that for Glenmore Street there'll be a significant reduction in coupon parks, but virtually no change in the residential parks. However, we are taking the unusual step of building some additional car parks that won't be they won't be on the street, but they'll be in the road corridor. This is because we had an area near a tennis club and some houses that didn't have off-street parking, and there was a grass verge that we were able to use to build several additional car parks. And we also had an area further up Glenmore Street where some residents didn't have off-street parks, and we had a grass verge there as well. So we were able to build some additional car parks there. For Chater Street, the reduction in car parks is much lower. It's about 21 car parks being removed. And for Karori Road, it's nowhere near as much of a problem because almost everybody in Karori has off-street parking, and there's a lot of capacity in the side streets.
Thank you.
Councillor Calvert.
Just in terms of bus stops outside the mall, have you had any conversations with Progressive, the mall owners?
We've had 2 meetings with the bid, and I think that they were present at the first meeting, but I'd have to double check.
The mall owners, because they've got the development planned for that site. So just wondering how that ties in. So have you talked with Progressive Foodstuffs?
They haven't contacted us about those developments.
But have you made contact with them about your plans?
I'm not sure, but we can check with our engagement lead.
That would be good. And given that we're going to increase the capacity for buses, and whatever buses they may well be, and for the peak, why aren't we considering priority bus lanes at this stage for peak times?
We have looked at the option of building a priority bus lane on Glenmore Street, on part of Glenmore Street where it would actually fit, and it doesn't actually quite fit. So that's the sort of project that we will recommend for the transformational project going ahead. At this stage, it would require essentially building a significant retaining wall to widen the road out.
But what about Karori Road?
Karori Road doesn't have the space.
Okay, and just Chater Street intersection, Chater Curtis Street intersection has been a real major issue for us from a safety perspective, and known accidents there. How does that fit into this?
So we're working closely with the team that's developing up the immediate safety improvements for that Chater Street Curtis Raro intersection, and we are actually incorporating their initial safety changes into the plans that you'll see next week. And then they're working through a business case at the moment for more significant plans that will probably see some lane changes happening either next year or the year after.
But why can't that be done as part of this project?
We can do the initial changes, the minor safety improvements. We can do those as part of this project, but it doesn't look like they'll be ready in time for the more significant changes.
But we're doing intersections all the way up the road, so just wonder why we can't deal with this properly as like we're all doing with the other intersections.
Yeah, one where the bike route goes on this section in the north direction is actually through Appleton Park, so in the uphill direction we avoid that intersection, the bike network. The other thing is that intersection has been going through a business casing process that's looking at potentially much bigger civil works that are outside the scope and timeframe of this project. So that needs to go through that process. It could end up with a solution that's a significant investment, but it just didn't align. But it also doesn't mess up. We're not doing anything through our project that will have an impact on where they end up there.
I have a couple.
Councillor Pennant.
Thanks for all of this. I again repeat my concerns around the removal of so many bus stops. That's easy for some people, but not others. But I just want to ask, just following on from Laurie's question about how the bus lanes, so the cycle lanes and the bus stops will work together, because it is quite difficult to manage some of those bus stops where the cycle lanes are, like on Tinakori Road.
Yes, the bus stops that will have an in-lane bus stop will be built using the very latest guidance from Waka Kotahi. So they've come up this year. They've come up with new guidance that makes it really clear how wide a pedestrian island needs to be between a cycle lane and a bus. So I think that that people will be pretty happy with the type of bus platforms that are being built. There are only 5, and as I say, the one that exists on Tinakori Road that people have had some issues with will be removed.
So they'll be nice and clearly marked, because I think that was one of the issues some people had with the bus platforms. It's just a bit unclear where you're supposed to stand.
Yes, yep. The new guidance has some really good design guidance for that, and so I think people will make it will be able to tell much more clearly exactly what they're meant to do at those platforms.
And that's, I think, just adding to that, that's one of the benefits we're seeing from the transitional, is that we had those CECLA platforms. We've discovered that they're probably not the best solution, so we're able to go and try something else and then go back and replace some as well if we need to. So that's the beauty of not doing these huge infrastructure and big investments, is that we actually can make these changes and learn as we go. Cool. Councillor Free.
Yeah, so Alex, we've just recently sort of approved the Birdwood Ave secondary route. I just wondered, did anyone from your Metlink have the chance to have some input into that?
Yeah, our assets and infrastructure team certainly reviewed those plans. I believe the query here is possibly about buses sweeping over the cycle lane.
Buses and, yeah.
So this is an approach that's being used on Raroa Road. There's also a section in Ngaio where currently the roads are quite narrow. You have parked cars, buses have to cross the road centre line. The approach is you have a cycle lane without any hit sticks, and the buses, obviously taking all due care, looking that there's no cyclists there, are able to sweep over that section as they come round, so they don't have to cross the road centre line. So overall, that seems, when you have a very narrow, constrained road space, a reasonable approach. But Jonathan's probably a better.
It's absolutely fine. I didn't need any further answer. Just one more quick one. How does Metlink perceive the cyclist being in lane going downhill, and will that, that's several schemes are like that, will that slow the buses down a lot?
It's an approach that obviously where cycle volumes are low and bus volumes low works particularly well. I was out on Bowen Street this morning just actually observing this very thing, and certainly in that location, because it's downhill, you don't have a speed differential between the cyclists and the buses, so it appeared to be working quite well. We've been checking with our bus operators. We certainly haven't had any issues or concerns raised to us so far about that Bowen Street section, and our reliability for the operator of those services, their reliability stats have been quite good in recent weeks, so we are watching, but it seems to be working.
Cool. Okay. Look, unfortunately, we need to move on to the last part of the presentation. So I will pass over to Sky.
Can officers stay behind it when we're finished here then, so we can talk a bit more? I've got more questions about Crawley.
Yeah, and that's why I said earlier that you can send emails to people.
Yeah, but I want to talk.
Or meet with them.
I'd like
in
to
their
talk
own
with them
time,
afterwards if we can.
in your own time.
Yeah, because we really need more time to ask questions. It's a major thing.
Okay, I'm very happy to now introduce Skye Duncan. She's the Executive Director of the Global Designing Cities Initiative, which is the global urban design initiative focused on transforming streets around the world and developing international best practice street design principles for use in a wide variety of street typologies. So Skye and her team developed the award-winning Global Street Design Guide, working with 72 cities in 42 countries. It's now translated into 5 languages and endorsed by 100 cities, which includes us. Skye's an urban designer with 20 years experience in architecture, urban design and planning, and prior to working at GDCI, she spent 7 years in New York helping to make it a more sustainable, resilient, livable city. In 2019, Skye was actually recognised as one of the remarkable women in transportation, which is a very cool thing that they do every year. And she's worked professionally as an international urban design consultant all over the world. She's an adjunct associate professor from Columbia University, and it all started at Victoria University with an honours in Bachelor of Architecture. So really warm welcome to Skye. Over to you.
Thanks, Claire. And feel free to stand up and stretch. I know it's a long time to ask you guys to sit there and concentrate. So honestly, stand, stretch, dance, whatever you feel like. I've been asked to just give a really brief intro on some of the work we've been doing to supplement the incredible work you guys are doing here in Wellington City. As City Councillors, you guys will know all too well that streets are your largest network of public space that you have in your cities, and therefore this kind of insanely amazing asset that we have to rethink to address so many different challenges. Sadly, in almost every corner of the world, we have this trend of giving that space by default over to private vehicles at the expense of the health and safety and well-being of us, of people, of our families, the people who really help our cities thrive on a daily basis. Now, of course, it's incredibly contested space, right? When you think about how we value our private real estate down to the square centimetre of space, yet our public space is so much that we have to try and achieve, from mobility and access, environmental and economic sustainability, livability and quality of life, and of course, public health and safety. When we look at the numbers, Claire showed some slides alluding to this. They don't lie. We can see very quickly that when we look at the efficiency of how we distribute that space, when we give that and prioritise that space for people walking, cycling and taking transit, we are able to move many, many more times people. By drawing the lines in slightly different spaces, we can not only move more people, but we can start to achieve other things like managing our water, improving our air quality and improving our biodiversity. It's not okay when we think globally about these stats. We have 99% of our population breathing polluted air. We have over 80% of our adolescents globally not physically active enough. Primary reason because of our streets and our cities and our neighbourhoods not inviting people to walk to school as part of their daily routines. And we have 1.35 million traffic fatalities on the streets every year. This number breaks my heart because it is the #1 killer of our young people, and these deaths are completely preventable through the design and policy decisions that people like you guys at this table make on a daily basis. So at GDCI, these are driving factors in the work we do. With a team scattered across the globe, we work in both paper and practice. We've worked and touched down in over 30 cities across the globe on a number of areas, from helping think about policy and design guidance to capacity building and community engagement, to helping getting projects on the ground and measure and evaluate the impact of those projects. As Claire mentioned, the Global Street Design Guide was created a few years ago with contributions from folks across the globe and has now been endorsed by over 100 cities, regions and organisations, including Wellington, offering a permission slip to do things differently, to break the trends and challenge the status quo. In recent years, we've also been able to release our Designing Streets for Kids guide and other practical handbooks around how we can go about these quick builds, getting projects on the ground to show people what's possible, and how do we evaluate and measure the impacts of those. And part of our goal is to have resources that can inspire our leaders like you guys, that are technical enough to inform our practitioners, and visual and accessible enough to be able to empower our communities to know what to demand of the spaces in their streets. And we hope these can help us achieve the global agenda through local action. To invert this outdated hierarchical pyramid where the car has been king for too long and we've forgotten about human beings, to instead prioritise people and sustainable mobility choices. The bulk of our city streets, the bulk of your streets here in Wellington are already built. I don't see that many brand new streets being built. So if we don't go and ask what's possible of the space we have and ask how that can support more functions, how it can support more people, then we're never going to address all the crises that we're facing. From our larger network planning to the individual facility design and the centimetres of space we give to each user, to the larger toolkit of elements that we know can support a wonderful experience for people cycling, walking, taking transit, and so forth. So whether it's a neighbourhood street that might be rethought and reimagined to give protected cycle infrastructure, a bit like we did back in New York City, thinking about using parked cars to protect cyclists versus the other way around, where we not only saw wonderful improvements in pedestrian and cycle crashes, but great improvements in things like retail sales. Or commercial and mixed-use streets, where these types of transformations can prioritise transit and cyclists and play, a bit like we see in cities like Ljubljana, where the before and afters start to show us these transformations. Or in Fortaleza in Brazil, where a combination of reducing speed limits and looking at design changes took a death trap and in a matter of months was able to drastically reduce these the statistics through a short-term project, and through permanent change a few years later has now seen 0 fatalities. Just one of the many projects that has allowed the city to see 8 years of reduction in road traffic fatalities in the last decade. Or our residential streets, which are the front doors of our neighbourhoods, right? The playgrounds for our families. What if these spaces could be reimagined, not only to allow local access and lower volumes at lower speeds, but that they could also allow a moment for a young child to smell the herbs, or for a father to teach his child to ride a bike, like this one in Copenhagen. And our key destinations like our schools and shopping areas and hospitals can also be reimagined and be redesigned to cater for more people and their basic needs. We can take our intersections like this one in Bogota and transform them quickly over a matter of a weekend to collect quantitative and qualitative information, show what's possible, and catalyse longer-term change like this one that then had a protected cycle pathway throughout the intersection. Or in Milan, outside this school, again, working with the city to transform the space and work on adjacent corridors where using low-cost materials and spatial redistribution, we were able to see 4 times increase in the cyclists. So these types of changes that we're asking, we know are scary, right? Challenging the status quo is really not an easy thing to do. And even the people who want to see the change, sometimes it's really difficult to be the ones doing that. It can often feel like we're getting attacked from every corner with pitchforks, and we know that small groups of people can make a lot of noise and some really loud protesting. We know that if we don't work closely with our journalists, fundamental allies in this work, then we can have headlines that can do us damage rather than help us. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, we see again and again examples that when we collectively ask people's opinions about these types of changes, for this example in New York City, we see the type of approval when we reimagine our streets and public spaces. And it's not just the New Yorks and Parises and Londons, it's the Montreals and the Milans and Tiranas and Sydneys and Fortalezas as well. And so we've been thrilled to build off this movement through the BC program supported by Bloomberg Philanthropies to be able to build off what's possible. We take our gold star cities that we all roll our eyes and go, yeah, whatever, we're not Amsterdam. But Amsterdam didn't used to be Amsterdam either, right? And today they have 4 times as many bikes than cars. Yeah, whatever, we're not Copenhagen. But Copenhagen wasn't Copenhagen a few decades ago, right? These types of transformations now have allowed over 60% of their population to bike to work, school each day. It's not surprising when you look at the fact that they actually give space and priority to that mode of transportation. And these types of transformation did not drop out of the sky magically, sadly. It took people like you guys making a conscious decision to do things differently and to fight for a different future for their cities. So more recently, we're seeing cities like Seville that Claire mentioned, incredible improvements in a matter of a couple of years. The Paris and larger investments happening across France. Examples like Bogota, where they have the temporary events that see 2 million people every single Sunday out on over 100 kilometres of streets that are temporarily closed to cars and opened to people. But they also train their next generation to see cycling as part of their daily routines. And they've just launched a new bike share program to support their cycle infrastructure work, embracing people with disabilities and cargo bikes, so we again can see wonderful examples to borrow and steal from others, and the wonderful stats of increased ridership. To cities like Fortaleza that also complement their infrastructure with innovations like bike share for kids. They take all their parking money and they invest that back into improved cycle infrastructure and bike share for the city. And they train their kids again. Cities like Milan, who on top of the infrastructure are also doing things like bike share, e-bike share systems and docks. But not stopping there, they're putting kid seats on the back of them so that we can make it more accessible to families. So with BC, we've been excited to look at these innovations around the world. As Claire mentioned, we were blown away to have almost 300 applications from over 66 countries and 10 selected cities. As a Kiwi, I am so proud to have a Kiwi city in this group of 10 cities. And I will admit I was very impartial. I had to stay very quiet with the Kiwi applications. But thrilled that you guys are now part of this group that represent 15 million people and over 600 kilometres of cycling infrastructure and innovative design around the world. We recently had some of your team in London, as Claire mentioned, to meet each other, but to also do things like today to bring those lessons back and build and expand your own local BC networks here in Wellington. And alongside all of these mayors, wonderful to have you guys here working together, and we hope to be able to keep connecting you so that we can learn whether it's Bangkok or Sao Paulo, projects in Dublin or Lisbon, across the ditch, not the ditch actually, we're just up the road in Auckland, to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And I think we need to think about the fact that yes, we have this 1 to 7% of our people in our cities that are going to ride no matter what. But this is not who we should be designing for. We should be designing our cycle facilities for our grandparents and our families and our children. And so we want to keep the face of this young girl in our minds and question when we are making decisions, when we're talking to communities about these types of projects and why we have to make some of the trade-offs that we're having. We are investing in the future of the citizens of Wellington. And so we know this is hard, but we absolutely need you guys around this table. We need your commitment, your leadership, your audacity to challenge the status quo and to do things differently. Your local action to support these types of projects, to really work together to accelerate the global cycling revolution. So I'm thrilled this is just the beginning of the BC journey to be working with you guys, and we hope that some of our support and resources can help you guys here to reimagine and reinvent the streets of Wellington. Thanks so much for your time. Happy to stick around, and obviously we might be seeing a bit more of you in the coming years. Thanks so much.
Oh, that was inspiring. We've got a couple questions.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So, Councillor Pannett online.
Thanks so much, Sky. Look, good work from the council, but you might have heard my question about the amount of parking that's still being relied on. And I just wondered what advice you had about actually challenging city councils to think about a car-free future.
I think that's a fabulous idea. I know there are proposals on the table for portions of Wellington to start incrementally removing private vehicles and prioritising that space for other users. So I would say absolutely keep fighting for that. It's pretty difficult to obviously do it overnight. I think what we've seen around the world a number of different strategies. We've seen some cities like the Melbournes who over a matter, and Copenhagen, for example, the matter of 40 years have, made a commitment to remove, 2%, 5%, 10% of their parking every single year incrementally. And we're starting to see more bold cities like Paris who say, you know what, we don't have 40 years. We don't want to wait 40 years to get rid of the prioritization of how we distribute this space. We want to be designing this for the today of our children, right? Not our kids' grandchildren. And actually through radical rethinking of these policies, absolutely we can get rid of parking and in smaller areas and trial it. I think one thing that's been really powerful is using shorter term interim interventions to trial things so that if it doesn't work, we can put things back if needed, if we can kind of do 6 months, 1 year, a couple of years of trialling things. It's pretty much guaranteed that when we take away parking, when we take away space for cars, we are going to get a lot of pushback. And so I think we need to expect that, and we need to remind ourselves of some of those statistics I put up earlier on about the bigger picture of what we're fighting for here, and the types of decisions we need to make for a different future. So I think every city's going to go at their own pace, but yeah, I'm certainly an advocate for figuring out what we need right now and how do we set a really bold vision for the future, because sometimes the incremental is really powerful, and sometimes we need to move a whole lot faster than the incremental. You're welcome. Yay. Awesome. We'll see you soon. Keep up the amazing work, and thank you for your leadership.
Councillor Matthews.
Yeah, thank you, Sky. And that was an amazing presentation. I just wish I had seen the pictures for a bit longer. But I guess I just wanted to quickly say that as someone who's been making these decisions, how proud I am of our organisation. And I just want to say that to the team. The work, I think, is exceptional, and I feel very proud to be in any way associated with it. But I wanted to ask you, for when we're feeling bogged down by that negativity, which comes through, at times is quite difficult to work through. What would be your advice for elected leaders to keep that sort of momentum to keep on pushing ahead with these changes?
Yeah, oh, what an awesome question. I was telling these guys, actually, a really good friend of mine picked me up from the airport. I said, look, I'm here for like 12 hours, not even, in Wellington. He said, look, why don't I come pick you up and drop you off? We'll get 20 minutes together to say hello. And he said, what are you doing here? And I said, oh, look, we're up working with the council on some of the bike facilities and supporting. And he goes, oh, these bloody bike lanes. And we spend all of our time together debating. And he's a real cyclist, right? And I said to him, listen, you are part of this one, you guys, I'm sure you know the statistic, right? 1% are going to ride no matter what, 7% confident they're going to ride. Third of the population never going to ride, never going to get them on a bike, don't even bother trying. 60% of our population want to ride a bike. They don't feel safe doing so. And so I think we've seen in these cities around the world what's possible. And I must say, I've been back in New Zealand now for about 3 or 4 years, and I can see how it's really hard when people don't have that incredible privilege to go to other places and see a different reality of what's possible, to only be able to look 2 steps ahead and to see our streets filled with cars moving and parked, and to even begin to imagine a different reality. But I would say when you get that pushback, Google some of these images. I can share them with you. Look at them and remember these stats that we're working towards. Any pushback is guaranteed. So I think, one, there's a level of we need to thicken our skin. We need to understand that building 100% consensus is really, really difficult. But if we cannot get paralysed to the point of inaction, because if we do, these global stats that we're facing are just going to get worse and worse and worse. So taking no action is not an option. It really isn't. So I'd say take a deep breath. Know that you're doing the right thing. Remind ourselves that, even the cyclists are going to complain about some of this stuff, right? And the avid cyclists. And, we may not be able to get, I think Claire alluded to this, we may not be able to get the perfect network out overnight. But when we can work at scale and work with some speed and get a connected network, we can start to get that ridership up. We can also then start to imagine what would happen when we bring in bike share. What if we thought about radical ideas about gifting lotteries of electric bikes to a certain number of people per year? There's no limitations of what we actually could do if we looked around the world and looked at the different things cities have done, and how do we steal and borrow and adapt some of those to us here in Wellington. The world is our oyster, and that's part of connecting these guys and you guys in the BC network, is to learn from other cities. So I'd say, deep breaths. Imagine the future that you want your children, great children, grandchildren, all of the future generations of Wellington to live in, and that know that they're breathing clean air and that they can get to school safely and not have to get hit, and the businesses can thrive, and all of those good things that we're all fighting for.
Cool. And last one from Deputy Mayor Foon.
Yeah, kia ora, Sky, and just want to echo what Councillor Matthews said, but also I can say I was just having a lot of emotional movements looking at those images, so thank you. Quick question, you know, part of our movement has been perceived as being anti-car, and one of our key taglines within one of our programs is to move more people with less cars. I guess, you know, that's not the desired outcome, like we do want less cars in the city, but have you got any advice around messaging that we could be better on, or anything to help not get that anti-car perception?
Yeah, look, I think one of the most powerful things we need to remind ourselves in this work is that, yes, we do need to ultimately have less cars on the street. So I think we have to, it's silly to try and pretend that that's not a part of the solution, because then we're not addressing the elephant in the room. Now, I think that's different than saying nobody should ever drive ever or never own a car, right? And I think what we're fighting for is authentic, really authentic mobility choices for people. And the reality is, across a lot of New Zealand and across a lot of other parts of the world, those authentic choices are not there. People do not have the option to choose to send their kids to school, and they have to drive them because they do not feel safe, and the kids are not safe on the streets walking or cycling on their own. And that transit might not be reliable in some cases, I'm not saying in Wellington, but you know, when we're looking often at the same time, we can't put in our blinders and only do one thing. So reality is, yes, we need to make driving harder, and we need to make parking harder, and look at the real costs of what that mode of transportation is doing to our cities when we think about the broader public health and climate challenges. But at the same time, we have to make sure we're doing the flip side, and we're doing everything we can to invest in more feasible, viable, affordable, safe, comfortable journeys on public transit, cycling and walking. And we have to do both of those things together. So it's not being anti-car holistically. It's about giving people authentic choice. And we don't do that in New Zealand at the moment. We really don't.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, that brings us to the end of this this briefing today. Sky, thank you so much for that really inspiring and hopeful end to this topic today. But if you want to stick around and maybe have a chat to Sky and the team afterwards, please do that, and there's some food at the back. But I just want to say, yeah, again, a big thanks to you, Sky, to Jonathan and Claire, Alex from MetLink, Vida, and all the staff that have come to join us for this briefing this afternoon, and Kevin over there. Thank you very much for this comprehensive briefing. I feel really well informed and really hopeful about the next few projects adding to Pāneke Pōneke. So thank you, everyone, and hope you have a really nice afternoon. Kia ora.